So I'm just going to record this a little quick. There's not going to be really much visuals going on or things being said. I just kind of wanted to clarify something because, you know, when you're recording and writing your weird, dumb Ben 10 video game essay, and you decide to make an impromptu stream based on something that comes in your recommended feed, sometimes your initial takes are a bit messy. Especially when the creator of that video replies with some fair and pretty valid complaints. Firstly, I would just say watch the original video and support FNAF in general. It's also going to be really important for context for what I'm going to say. To clarify, this really isn't an apology video. It really just is a clarification video of why I said things and trying to explain what my takes were. Some of the things I think were totally just kind of me being a little too hard on the spot. I think editing and music complaints were pretty unfair, though I will clarify the editing things I was complaining about, because the first time around when I talked about the stick figures, I thought this was the bit. I thought the joke was that they were intentionally stick figures to look simple and a little silly. As for the music choices, totally unfair. I was kind of sorry if that came off of me trying to be mean or be a bully. I just thought those were funky and wanted to point them out. I do want to address something that FNAF focused on in his comment on my video, which is my word choice of lazy when I was talking about the video's conclusions. Misspeaking and having trouble articulating the feeling I was getting with the video. It's not that much better, but I think the word I was really trying to say was, it felt uninspired. Let me try to explain it, because it feels like this video tries to dig up old arguments and ideas that have been beaten into the ground and don't really apply to this new information. FNAF has consistently relied on the Silver Eyes and this consistent notion that your theories somehow have to tie back to the original trilogy of books and the original series of games. And I feel like part of what makes the Mimic interesting and a new point to argue and talk about and theorize around is that it's something so different and changes so much of the new information to really be a new pseudo-reboot, kind of soft effort to make it a new franchise or story arc. And I felt like that's what I was trying to articulate, and I just couldn't, because I didn't really know how to put that into words in the moment. So yeah, lazy, totally a mean-spirited thing that didn't feel like it was right to say. But what I really meant was, oh, we're doing this again. The same oops all Elizabeth argument again, huh? It felt like that argument was being force-fit with the new Mimic information, rather than trying to interpret the new Mimic information in creative new ways, which I think is FNAF's strong suit. But I want to make it clear that I wasn't saying or focusing on anything out of malice or trying to be mean-spirited towards FNAF. I say these things because I want to add to things and explain why a new idea does or doesn't work. If your idea and point with all of these videos is to add something new to the table and bring a new point of discussion, then it's part of that discussion to say why it doesn't work. I know I was being too mean with things, and I'm still working on that. That is a flaw with me as a person and a video creator and a reactor. But it shouldn't just be a thing where you brush off what I was actually saying. So FNAF, if you're seeing this video, here's the one takeaway I would recommend to help avoid these complaints and make better videos in general in the future. And they all kind of tie back to not really the theorizing itself. I think the main problem I've had consistently is, especially with the Midnight Motors video, I was having trouble understanding what was being argued and what was being claimed. I couldn't tell what the full story you were trying to spin was. It felt like a lot of things were isolated connections just made to piece things together to make claims. And yet I didn't know why you would want to make those claims. What was the point of the story or the thing you were trying to articulate with these points? I genuinely had to watch the Midnight Motors video 8 times to finally understand what was being said, and I still didn't understand the full story arc you were trying to pitch. Why were these things happening in the story? Beyond just the evidentiary stuff, beyond just the theory itself, beyond just the ideas you were saying. And this latest video is another example of that. I think this latest video is a really big example of that. The first real claim made by this video that isn't just stuff explained in the Mimic stories is that Baby is the original Mimic, but irrespective of that, they mass produce other Mimics, and those are not Mimic 1, but are still connected to Mimic 1, and Tails' Mimic is not Baby, but I'm getting confused even trying to explain this. Basically, Baby is the original Mimic, they mass produce new Mimics, and those Mimics do shenanigans, I guess, so the FNAF 2 Mimic, the FNAF 2 animatronics. and then Baby is just irrespective of the original Mimic. And it becomes really hard to tell when you're talking about the Mimic from the Tales books, Baby, versus the Mimic 2s and the Glamrock, because those are also connected in this theory. And it's just hard to tell what's being said about what, and sometimes things are used interchangeably when they really can't be used interchangeably. Not to compare theorists or videos, but in Raito's video on a similar overall topic, they do a better job and outright make and take time to clarify what mimics they're talking about and what context between the tales and the games. And that is really needed in this video, where so many words are used in such interchangeable ways. And it makes it really hard to follow what you're talking about and what you're linking to what. Another frustrating example is the interchangeable use of Charlie bots and Elizabeth bots. Under this theory, they are always Charlie bots. Refer to them as Charlie/Elizabeth bots, despite the fact that Elizabeth only inhabits one specific model of the Charlie bots. So there's no reason to word them as Elizabeth bots in this theory, which just makes it more confusing what you're arguing along throughout the video when they really should be clumped and organized. The Mimic Ball and Mendo connection is one of the first things said, but it takes 4 minutes later into the video for that whole thing to be connected to Baby. You just kind of drop the Mimic Ball connections, continue talking about the Mimic's origin story, and then out of nowhere bring them back to connect to Baby, seemingly. Like when you're watching the video first time, it seems like this information is pointless and just being moved on from, when it's not. When it takes 4 minutes to make it clear why you stated something earlier, something that could have just been stated for the first time later, you're waiting a sixth of the video to clarify why these points were stated. I think more arguments need to be made in the bigger picture. Sometimes the video will stop to make claims and there's not really a full scope to those explanations. For example, it's not really clear what the story of Baby as the Mimic really is in this video. It makes arguments that the Baby is the Mimic, it gives some connections, then it just sort of makes the claim that Baby will be the big bad. What does that even mean? Does the Baby Endo come back as the main villain? Is she actually the Mimic 1 or rebuilt endoskeleton of Burntrap, controlling Burntrap? Is she going to be creating new Aftons even if Burntrap's destroyed and that's the threat? Is in Help Wanted she creates the new recreated AI Afton and that's going to be the threat? Is she can keep doing that? Is she just going to be revealed as a true puppet master AI controlling everyone? Is she the Blob and the Blob is actually the main villain? Also, why would this have to be the case to tell this story arc? Because you have to think about it from the standpoint of Steelwool and Scott creating a story. Why would Scott bring back Baby just to have her recreate Afton and then have Afton be the main threat we see in the games and doing everything as the rebuilt Mimic? Or something like the rebuilt Mimic, or whatever you want to argue Burntrap is. When you don't have any clear influence with Baby other than she creates the new main villain, it's really hard to claim she's actually the real big villain. Baby has no clear influence over Help Wanted and the virtual experience, and no clear influence in the security breach on a surface level. If those were there, these claims would feel more just. But because the only connection between the Mimic and Baby established in the video is the Mimic Ball to Mendo, and them having antennas with similar reused assets on Baby's design, it becomes really hard to follow why these connections were made in the first place. As much as I dislike the game theory final timeline part, from a theory standpoint, it does a good job of explaining why Miss Afton would be the big threat and why she would be doing things. It makes it clear what her role in stories moving forward would be, and this theory doesn't do anything like that, or at least not well enough to make it make sense. I know these come off as nitpicking and unnecessary details maybe in a vacuum, but small things like this add up. When there isn't a clearly stated story you're building, or a clearly stated thing you're trying to explain, or a clear question you're trying to answer other than, how does the Mimic fit into my prior theory? It comes off as random individual segments building on each other's assumptions. And those assumptions and connections become harder and harder to follow the way they're presented. I don't think the inherent ideas in this video are bad. I don't even think that arguing the Tales books are a close parallel canon but not the same continuity is inherently impossible. In fact, I kind of want to give my own shot at trying a parallel timeline, at least just as a thought experiment. I don't think Edwin being a counterpart to Henry is that absurd. And I don't even think that arguing prior characters might have been a mimic or built from a mimic or mass-produced mimics is that absurd. But it comes off as crazy and irrational if it's not explained well. I guess my overall recommendation is you don't want to change your theories themselves, or you don't want to change the logic you're going to use, or your problem solving, or the way you connect things. I think the actual final script and explanation and presentation has to have some second look or someone cross over it to make sure what you're saying makes sense. Feels like this is the first draft of the script or something like that. And I'm really not trying to come off as an all-knowing asshole. I'm just saying this is a problem I have as a viewer of your content. And I would say, even if you can't find someone to analyze your scripts or rework on them, just rewriting the script once or twice to consolidate and compartmentalize arguments and make the big picture clearer would help smooth-brained, angry, weird bird things like me have no doubts or confusion of what you're trying to say. If you're going to play the oddball out there theories or new ideas angle, you have to learn that people are going to criticize or break them down or debunk them. Try to argue they're debunked, because that's, like I said earlier in the video, part of the discussion. Knowing why a weird out there theory can't work is just as valid. Anyway, I'm going to go back to make my Ben 10 video.